It is August again. You noticed that this morning, or somebody said it out loud, and there was a half second where it did not sound right. Not sad, not frightening, just wrong. The way a step that is not there is wrong. You did the arithmetic anyway. The year is more than half gone, and you could not say where. Then you carried on because there is nothing to do with a feeling like that. Everyone you know has that half second. People have been writing it down for 150 years, and they report it at every age, not only the old ones. Nothing happened to your years. Something happened to the window you look back through. Not the years, the window. And I want to be careful with you from the first minute, because this subject attracts confident answers. There is a famous explanation for it. You have almost certainly heard it. It has been repeated for a century and a half, and when researchers went looking for the pattern it predicts, they did not find it. So you are going to get the explanation. And then you are going to get what happened when somebody tested it. Because there is something real here. The feeling is not imaginary, and it is not vanity. It turns up in surveys in Germany, in New Zealand, in the Netherlands, in Japan. But it does not turn up everywhere you would expect it to. It appears in one place, sharply, and where it appears is the strangest part of this whole story. And you have a private version of it that you do not say out loud. A number that stops you. Somebody's age. How long ago something was that still feels current. You do the subtraction, get the answer, and then check it again, because the first answer looked like a mistake. That is the same half second, wearing different clothes. It will happen to you at least twice this year, and you already know the feeling well enough to recognize it from a description. 1877. A French philosopher named Paul Janet publishes a short idea. A year, he says, is judged against the life you have already lived. To a 10-year-old, 1 year is a 10th of everything. To a 50-year-old, it is a 50th. Same year, smaller share, so it feels smaller. That is the whole argument. It fits on a napkin, and it has never needed a laboratory. 13 years later, William James carries it into the most influential psychology book in the English language. And here is the part almost nobody quotes. James passes the idea along, and then says it does not reduce the mystery very much. He was not announcing a law. He was reporting a suggestion and marking his own dissatisfaction with it. The suggestion is still traveling. The dissatisfaction is not. And James did not stop at passing it on. He offered something of his own. He thought the years thin out because the days stop bringing anything new. Childhood is one first thing after another. Adulthood is the same week repeated with the furniture moved. That second idea is the one you actually believe. Most people quoting the arithmetic are really carrying this instead. A different claim from the same page with a different fate. Hold on to it. It gets tested later at scale, and the result is not kind. So the idea is old, it is popular, and it is already in your head. In one study of 313 people, more than 8 in 10 had heard it before they were asked anything at all. Hold that, because it comes back later and it does damage. When more than 8 in 10 people already know what the answer is supposed to be, you have to ask what a survey is measuring. Their time, or their agreement. But first, the size of the thing. Two researchers, Whitman and Lenhoff, surveyed 499 people between 14 and 94. They found age relationships, small to moderate ones. Their strongest models account for about 1/10 of why people differ from each other, which leaves 9/10 of it as something else, not age. something else. Then a larger effort. Friedman and Janssen, 2 samples, 1,865 people between them. They ask the plain question, how fast does time generally pass for you? In one sample, the age difference is about as small as a difference can be and still be printed. In the other, age accounts for roughly 1%. 1%. For the thing everybody is certain about. And there is a detail in that data that nobody expects. Young people also say time is going fast. Not occasionally, routinely. Whatever those surveys found, it was not the old report fast time and the young report slow time. Both report fast time. The difference between them is small, and you have to go looking for it. So the belief is not describing what was measured, which leaves a question shaped like a hole. The feeling is real. You had it this morning. The belief is close to universal, and the measured effect is a fraction of what the belief promises. So either almost everybody is exaggerating, or we have been asking the wrong question and getting a small, honest answer to it. There is a way to tell those apart. It takes years of surveys and one very specific comparison. Stop and ask how you would even test this. You cannot put a person into 1990, take them out in 2020, and ask how it went. So researchers do the only thing available. They ask people, on a scale, how fast has the past year gone? Very slowly to very fast. One line, one number, that is the instrument. Everything after this rests on it, and you should know how thin it is. A single line on a scale measures an experience. That is not nothing. It is the only access anybody has to this. But it is not a clock. It is not a count of memories. It is not a reading taken off an internal timer. It is a person, in a chair, telling you how something seemed. Every result in this episode is that, repeated, at scale. Hold it loosely and seriously at the same time. And there is a second thinness, and I would rather give it to you now than at the end. These studies mostly compare a 70-year-old to a 20-year-old today. They do not follow one person from 20 to 70. So when the numbers show a difference, that difference could be age. Or it could be that people born in 1955 had different childhoods, different schooling, different machines in their pockets. That confusion never fully leaves this literature. And a third thinness, which is the one researchers argue about most. Even for short stretches, the answer depends on how you ask. Ask someone to say how many seconds passed, and older adults give larger numbers. Ask them to produce a stretch, to say stop after 30 seconds, and they produce shorter ones. Ask them to copy a duration they have just experienced, and the age difference is not consistent at all. Same people, same seconds. 3 methods, 3 answers. Now, with those 2 thinnesses in view, look at what the researchers actually did. They did not ask one question. They asked the same person several, about different stretches of the same life. How fast is time in general? How fast did the last week go? The last month? The last year? And then the last 10 years. 5 questions, same person, same afternoon, same scale. If time genuinely runs faster for older people, if something inside has drifted, then all 5 answers should lean the same way. A drifting clock does not care how you word the question. That is the prediction. It is clean, it is testable, and it is what the napkin quietly promises. It is not what came back. Before that, one more thing, because a result from one country would be worth very little. The comparison has been run in Germany and Austria, in New Zealand and the Netherlands, and in Japan with 868 people outside the culture that produced the original idea. That is a repeat, and it matters. It is also 4 industrialized countries and a set of questionnaires. It is not proof of something universal in every human being. So, a 19th century explanation that fits on a napkin. A belief that more than 8 in 10 people are already carrying before you ask them anything. A measured effect of around 1% on the general question. And 5 questions asked in 4 countries that were all supposed to lean the same way. Now the explanation, and then what happened to it. The ratio idea is not vague. That is its great virtue, and its fatal problem. It makes a specific promise. The felt length of a year should shrink smoothly, in proportion, across your whole life. 10 to 11 should be a large step. 50 to 51 should be almost nothing. Smooth, continuous, predictable from arithmetic alone. You can check a promise like that. People did. Here is where it breaks. Ask people how fast the last year went, the exact unit the theory is built on, and the age difference is small, inconsistent, or simply not there. Not reversed, not reduced, often absent. The theory's own unit, asked directly, does not behave the way the theory requires. A model that cannot predict its own unit is not a law. It is an image. And it fails going the other way as well. Researchers sampled people through the day on their phones and asked how fast time was passing right now. Young and old did not differ. That was 29 people, so hold it lightly. What did relate to the answer was attention and mood, whether you were absorbed in something. How you felt, not how many years you had already lived. So the ratio idea has 4 things to explain, and it explains none of them. Why the moment does not differ by age. Why the week does not. Why the year, its own unit, does not. And why more than 8 in 10 people are certain of it anyway. It was never tested against any of that. It survived because it is easy to repeat. And the versions circulating now are weaker than Janet's, not stronger. You have seen them. Charts where your life is a grid and the squares shade in. Calculators that tell you what percentage of your memories are already made. Those are not findings. That is the napkin drawn larger. Nothing in this research supports treating them as a measured law of aging. There is one more version of the arithmetic, and it is the cleverest of them. It says old events drift forward in memory. You date things closer to now than they were. So the decade behind you feels packed into a shorter run. That drift is documented, but it may not be time compressing. It may be forgetting. It may be dating errors growing with age. It may be which memories happen to fall inside the window you were asked about. And when researchers tested whether it explains the 10-year answer, it did not. The prediction was specific. It failed. So the famous explanation is a 19th century suggestion, one that its own popularizer found unsatisfying and that its own unit contradicts, which leaves the feeling standing there, still real, with nothing underneath it. Before we go looking for what is underneath, one question, and it takes one word. One word. Not a story, not a reason, just the number. Which year of your life felt longest? Not the best one, not the worst one. The one that, when you look back at it, takes up the most room. Some people know instantly. Some have to go looking, And the looking is the interesting part. Whichever year arrived first, that one. Here is what took researchers decades to separate, and once you have it, you cannot unsee it. There is not one question about time. There are three, and they do not answer each other. The first, you know in advance you will be asked how long something took. You watch it happen. The second, you are asked afterwards with no warning. And the third is different from both. Not how long, how fast. Those are not three wordings of one question. They come apart in the laboratory. When you know you are being timed, attention runs the answer. A dull meeting crawls because you keep checking. When you are asked afterwards, what matters is what changed while you were not counting. And how fast something felt can move in the opposite direction to how long it was. The same afternoon can be short and slow. That separation is the most solid finding in this entire episode. Not a hypothesis, a repeated experimental result. And it means something uncomfortable for almost everything you have read on this subject. Somebody takes a result about seconds in a laboratory and uses it to explain a decade of your life. They have stepped between measurements that do not connect. The bridge they walked across was not there. Here is the clearest example of that bridge. There is a well-known effect where a rare, unexpected image is judged to last longer than the repeated ones around it. It is real. It is also a study about fractions of a second, and it is about attention. You will see it used to prove that a new country stretches a summer, or that learning something makes a year longer. It does not show that. It was never asked to. Milliseconds of attention and a decade of your life are not one measurement in different clothes. Now put that beside the 5 questions. Because the researchers were not only changing what they measured, they were changing how far back they pointed it. A moment, a week, a month, a year, 10 years. 5 windows onto the same life, opened one after another in the same afternoon by the same person. And only one of them behaves strangely. The general question, almost no age difference. The moment, none. The week, small or absent. The month, the same. The year, the unit the famous theory is built on, small, inconsistent, often nothing. The last 10 years. That is where it shows up, repeatedly, in every country they tried. The years are not speeding up. Only one question about them behaves strangely, and it is the widest window you can ask through. Now the limit, before the meaning. That is the order here. That 10-year difference is real, and it repeats. It is also modest, self-reported, and taken by comparing different people rather than following one. The strongest models in this literature account for around 1/10 of why people differ. So this is not a law of aging. It is a reliable oddity in one corner of a questionnaire. But look at what that oddity rules out. Something inside running faster would show up everywhere. It does not. A shrinking ratio would show up in the year. It does not. Whatever this is, it does not look like a change in how time passes through you. It looks like something about the act of looking back across a wide stretch. That is the window. And a wide window is not a longer version of a narrow one. It is a different job. Ask me about last Tuesday, and I retrieve something. Ask me about the last 10 years, and I cannot. There is too much of it. I have to produce an answer instead. Estimate, compress, decide what counted. Nobody has shown how that production works. That is a guess about the shape of the problem, not a finding. But you can see that a question like that is not a measurement, it is a summary. And there is one place where memory clearly does the work. People watch a natural event lasting about a minute, then are asked afterwards how long it took. The number of separate sub-events they remember predicts their answer. Immediately, and again a week later. That is a real memory effect on felt duration. It is also about a minute. Notice how carefully I am keeping the scales apart, and notice how rarely anyone else does. So the sentence I can defend is narrower than the one you came here for. It is this. The feeling of losing time appears most reliably when a person is asked to summarize a very wide stretch of their life in one number. Not while they live it, not when they check the week. When they summarize the decade. That is smaller than "your years are disappearing." It is also the part that survives testing, and it changes what is worth blaming. Nothing happened to your years. Something happened to the window. So everything people accuse, the routine, the sameness, the years with nothing in them, has to be tested against that window. Not against the feeling. People have tested them. What came back is not what anybody was hoping for. Everybody has the same explanation for this, and you have probably said it out loud. Routine. The weeks identical to each other. Work. The same road, the same evening, and then a year is gone with nothing to hang it on. It is a good explanation. It feels like it explains your life. And it has been tested, more than once, at different sizes. Watch what happens. The first tests supported it. In short laboratory tasks and 2 small field studies, routine activity was remembered afterwards as shorter. Exactly what the story predicts. But the same work found something the story does not predict. When people knew in advance they would be asked about the time, routine flipped. It made time feel slower while they were inside it, slow while you live it, short when you look back. 2 directions at once. Sit with that, because it is the most familiar thing in this episode. The boring afternoon that will not end. The boring year that vanished. Both true, both about the same routine. Which already tells you, routine does not do one thing to time. It does different things depending on when you ask, which is the window again. Then somebody scaled it up. 4 studies, roughly 2,000 people. The question, does remembered routine explain how fast your life feels? It did not hold. Across those 4 studies, the routine explanation was not consistently supported. In one exploratory analysis, remembered routine related to a faster pace of life. 1 out of 4. In an analysis that was looking rather than confirming. So here is where routine stands, and it is not where you want it. In short laboratory windows, supported in both directions. Across 2,000 people asked about their lives, not consistent. It is a real effect at one size, and an unreliable one at another. Routine erases your years is a sentence the evidence does not currently pay for. And normally, that is where an episode like this would stop, with a shrug about how hard this is to test. Except something happened in 2020 that no ethics board would ever have approved. The routine of most of the planet was replaced, at once, for months. If routine compresses time, that was the experiment. Researchers ran the surveys. And the result is the most useful thing in this episode. Time did not go one way. In the United Kingdom, during the first lockdown, more than 8 in 10 people reported that their sense of the day and the week had come apart. But it came apart in both directions. Some people lost months. Other people crawled. Same restrictions, same emptied calendar, opposite reports. And what predicted which way you went was not how empty your diary was. Slower time went with older age, with stress, with having too little to do, with being less satisfied with the people around you. In France, researchers followed it for months. Slowed time tracked boredom, low mood, disrupted rhythm, disrupted sleep. In Germany, people looking back on the previous year reported it as slower than samples taken before any of it happened. So the cleanest natural experiment anyone could have designed did not confirm the routine story. It complicated it. Same emptiness, 2 directions. And what decided the direction was how you felt while you were inside it. Boredom, mood, company, load. Not the count of events. Which is the second time in this episode that counting has failed to explain anything. There is one more explanation you have heard, and this one is built on something solid. Ask an older person to recall their life, and the memories do not come out evenly. There is a bulge from adolescence and early adulthood. That pattern is real, and it repeats. The story attached to it is, those years are crowded, so everything after them feels thin. The pattern is solid. The story is not what the pattern shows. 2 problems. First, the bulge does not sit in one fixed place. Where you find it depends on how you ask. Roughly 16 to 30 for important memories. A much wider spread when you cue with single words. The tidy band people quote is tidier than the data. Second, and this is the whole thing, a bulge of memories in your 20s does not demonstrate that your 40s run faster. That is a story laid over a curve. Nobody has shown the step in between. And before this goes any further, one boundary, and I am not going to soften it. Normal aging changes some learning and some recall. That is ordinary, and it varies enormously between people. Mild cognitive impairment is a clinical category for more change than that. Dementia is cognitive loss that disrupts daily life. 3 different things, not the same conversation. Feeling the time is going fast is not a symptom, not a screening tool, not a warning sign. Nothing in this research makes it one. This episode is not about illness. Which brings us to the explanation you were probably about to give me. Fewer things happen, so fewer things get stored, so the decade has less in it and comes back short. Memory as a ledger, thinning out. It is the most reasonable idea in this whole subject. It is also the one that has been tested most directly. 3 separate surveys, 293 people, then 263, then 262. They asked how fast the last 5 years had gone. And then they counted. Important events reported, memories that arrived on their own. How those memories were spread across the years, whether they were happy or not. None of it related to how fast the 5 years felt. Then they pushed harder. 282 people were asked to recall 5 memories immediately before answering. 5 good ones or 5 bad ones. If the count of what you can reach drives the feeling, that should move the number. It did not move. And in 2026, 120 people between 20 and 91. Older participants did recall fewer events. They also rated them as more vivid and more important. None of those measures explained how fast the decade felt. What did carry some of it was general cognition and delayed recall, which the authors read as how efficiently new information gets encoded. That is a candidate, not a result. Small study, one time point. And when the youngest group is removed, the age link disappears altogether. Second question, and this one takes a sentence. Think of one day from the last 5 years that you can still see. Not a holiday necessarily, not a big occasion, just a day that stayed. Now the part that matters. Why that one? Something was different, or something was hard, or somebody said something you did not expect. Most people find the reason surprises them. It is rarely the day they would have chosen. The day and the reason. That is the whole answer. Back to what can be measured. Because there is an objection to this entire episode, and that is stronger than anything I have said so far, you are owed it at full strength. It says the thing we have been circling might barely exist. And it does not come from outside. It comes from inside, the same literature. Start with the number I gave you early and did not explain. On the general question, how fast does time pass for you? Age accounted for about 1% in one sample. In the other, the difference was smaller than most results anybody bothers to publish. Now put that next to the belief. More than 8 in 10 people are sure of this. It is a stock phrase. It is on birthday cards. The certainty is enormous. The measurement is a sliver. And it is worse than a mismatch, because the belief may be inside the measurement. Think about what you are actually doing when a researcher asks how fast the last 10 years went. You are not reading a dial. You are producing an answer to a question you have heard your whole life, one with a socially expected direction already attached. More than 8 in 10 knew what the answer was supposed to be before they gave it. From one line on a scale, there is no way to pull the experience apart from the expectation. Then the second problem, which I raised early because it does not go away. Almost all of this compares different people at different ages on one day. So time speeds up as you age, maybe something else entirely. People who grew up in the 1950s answer this question differently from people who grew up with a phone. Nobody in this literature has followed the same people across the decades and watched it happen. Put those together, and the objection is severe. A modest effect in one corner of a questionnaire, possibly shaped by a belief the participant already holds, measured across strangers rather than within one life. If you wanted to argue that this whole phenomenon is a cultural phrase people dutifully repeat when asked, that is the evidence you would use, and it is not weak. Here is the second reading, not a refutation, a second reading. The pattern repeats. Germany and Austria, New Zealand, the Netherlands, Japan. And it does not repeat as a blur. It repeats as the same shape. Nothing at the moment, nothing at the week. A difference at the decade. A phrase people simply recite would be easier to recite everywhere. It would not keep landing on the same one of 5 questions. There is also an attempt at a physical explanation, and it is worth naming because you will meet it. In 2019, a researcher argued that the mind processes fewer image changes per unit of physical time as the body ages, and that this is why the days seem shorter. It is a conceptual essay. It contains no experiment measuring how fast time feels at different ages. And it predicts a general slowdown, which is exactly what the survey data does not show. In 2025, a study of 577 people watching films found that some cortical states lasted longer with age. That is a real result, and that is interesting. It did not measure subjective time. The authors said so themselves, that the connection would need testing separately. So it does not confirm the earlier idea. And I am not going to tell you your brain records at a lower frame rate. Nothing here shows that. The phrase is doing work the evidence cannot pay for. This is where the science is stuck, and it is stuck in an unusual way. The instrument is a person on a scale. The design compares strangers. The belief arrives before the question does. And when the effect appears, it appears in the one place where the answer has to be built rather than recalled. Every one of those is fixable in principle. None of them has been fixed. So where do I stand? I think the effect is smaller than everyone believes and more interesting than the objection allows. Something happens at the widest window and nowhere else. And it keeps happening in countries that do not share the story. That is a position, and it could be wrong. The honest alternative, that this is a phrase we repeat because we were handed it, is live. I would rather be argued out of mine than agreed with quietly. If you have the better reading, put it under this. I read them. Before the end, here is where each piece stands. The sources are all in the description. That how long did it take and how fast did it feel are different measurements, and that watching the clock changes the answer. Fact. A repeated experimental result and the strongest thing in this episode. That the age difference is not general and shows up most reliably in long look-back questions. Well supported across several countries. And still self-report, still comparing strangers, still modest. That routine is the main reason your years feel fast, weak. Supported in short laboratory windows, not supported across 2,000 people asked about their lives. Pulled in both directions by the pandemic. That you leave fewer marks in memory as you age, and the decades shrink because of it. That is the explanation everyone reaches for, and it is the weakest claim here. The studies that counted the memories directly did not find the link, and what comes next is mine. Nobody has measured it. The science stops here. What comes next is mine, and I want that said clearly before I say it, because the rest of this is the part you will remember. Nothing after this sentence has been measured. Not tested, not replicated, not published. It is what I think the shape of the evidence points at, and the shape of evidence is not evidence. Here it is. There may be two different things we have been calling one thing: how long you lived, and how long it comes back as. Nobody experiences the first. You cannot feel the length of a decade while you are inside it. You only ever have today. The decade exists at the moment somebody asks you to produce one, which means the thing you are mourning in August is not a lost decade. It is a short answer, and a short answer is built out of whatever the widest window can reach. Not everything that happened to you. Whatever is standing up high enough to be seen from that distance. The years are all still there, at full length, unshortened. What changes is how much of them is visible from far away, and almost nothing that made a day worth living was ever visible from that distance. So the half second in August is not a report about your life. It is a report about a summary. Produced under pressure by something that was never built to answer where did 10 years go, and answers anyway. It hands you the honest thing it can reach. And then you take that answer, which is thin because the question is wide, and you feel it as loss. Nothing happened to your years. Something happened to the window you look back through. The window opened wider. That is all. And a wider window does not show you less life. It shows you less detail from further away, which is what distance does. The detail did not leave. You just stopped standing close enough to it. And that is a different situation from the one you thought you were in. You are not running out. You are not being drained. Nothing is being subtracted from you while you sleep. You are standing at a distance from something very large, holding a question that only lets you carry back one number. The year you named 20 minutes ago, the one that felt longest, is not longer than the others. You are standing closer to it. And the day you remembered, the one from the last 5 years, and the reason you gave for it. Something was different, or something was hard, or somebody surprised you. Now notice what it was not. It was not long. It was not efficient. It was not planned. It was the day that stood up high enough to be seen from where you are now. And you did not know at the time which one it would be. Nobody ever does. Which means the record is still being written, and you are not the one deciding what goes into it. That sounds like a loss. It is the opposite. It means there is no way to run out. The next thing that stands up will stand up on its own out of an ordinary week, and you will not see it coming. You have been doing this your whole life without knowing. Every year, you can still see was made exactly this way. So the years are not going anywhere. They are exactly where you left them, at exactly the length they were. It is only the question that is wide. And you will ask it again, next August, or the one after, in the same half-second, with the same small shock. If the only way to hold a decade is to crush it into one answer, what is the honest name for what you feel when you do? One more thing. 2 answers went past you tonight, a year and a day with a reason attached. Put them both under this, the year and the day, and why that one. I read them, and the reasons are never what I expect. Then send this to the person who said it to you first, the one who told you the years go faster. Stay strange.